All right, so I apologize. I know PowerPoints aren't very fun, but here we go. And we're starting off with a very exciting slide. So of course, this wall of text, I do have to iterate some key points here. The intended use of this actual instrument and for the assay, the COVID-19 assay, the intended use of this test itself is for individuals who are suspected of COVID-19 by their healthcare provider within the first 7 days of the onset of symptoms. Results are, of course, for the identification of genetic material of the virus that causes COVID-19, which is SARS-CoV-2 RNA. And it's generally detectable in respiratory samples during the acute phase of infection. And that kind of aligns with actually what our Binax Now test intended use is as well. Now, the negative results from the ID Now should be treated as presumptive, and if it's inconsistent with clinical signs and symptoms, or if it's necessary for patient management, then you should be testing it with a different authorized or cleared molecular test. And of course, negative results does not mean that, the patient can't be infected with any other viral infections or even a bacterial infection. And any positive results should, of course, be reported to the appropriate public health authorities, which is the Department of Health. So here's a picture of the instrument itself, the front view and the back view. Not much really to see here. The front view has a nice big screen, and that screen is very helpful in the fact that while you're performing the test, the screen actually shows a video of each and every step. The back view here, you can see just a bunch of ports for USB, the power cord. There's a little port for connectivity, but I believe you guys won't be utilizing that. And on the side here is the power button. I'm not going to really cover the initial setup too much because most of this has already been done. For example, an admin password has probably already been created. And generally, when you do the initial setup, it asks you to create an admin password for the admin user. And most times I recommend that people, when they first start it up, just set it to admin so that when you log in as admin, the password is admin. Okay, so here's the home menu. This is what the screen looks like directly on the instrument after logging in. There's 6 buttons here. They're very straightforward. For example, run test is to run patient tests, and run QC test is, of course, to run your quality control tests. Some things about quality control that you should, of course, be aware of is quality control is just to analyze and make sure that your testing process, the entire process, is working or functioning properly. So how often do you run quality controls? First of all, any brand new instrument straight out of the box, no one's touched it before, you have to run a positive and negative control for the COVID-19 test. Any untrained operators, so that's many of you guys that have never ran this test before, you have to run at least one positive or one negative test. And Priscilla, I'm sorry, I can't see the chat box. So if there's any chat questions that pop up, if you could, if I don't see them, just let me know there's something there because I don't see it at all.
Sure thing. I'm monitoring. I'll monitor the chat and let you know.
I appreciate that. Sorry. Thank you.
No worries.
It just occurred to me. Okay. So untrained operators, either a positive or a negative. This is just to make sure that you guys are completely competent in running this test. So that's just kind of a proficiency test for you guys. After that, any new shipment of kits, you're going to have to run a positive and a negative control. So that means if you have a shipment of 1 box of kits, that means you run 2 tests, 1 positive swab and a negative swab. If you have a shipment of 5 boxes, if they're all the same lot number, then what you're going to do is just run 1 positive and 1 negative control, 2 tests for that entire shipment. That just covers the entire shipment. And that's just basically to check and make sure that your kits are working properly and that, the FedEx driver didn't, toss those kits here and there and do whatever they do during delivery, or maybe it was kept at the wrong temperature. So in addition to that, if there are any more regulations per your facility, per our local state and or federal regulations, you could, of course, do additional QC testing to go along with that. So those were the first 2 buttons. Review memory, this 3rd button here, that one's just to look back at any of your previous patient results or your previous QC results. The beauty of this instrument is that it can store up to 999 test results. And there's a functionality in this button or in this option to export results onto a USB thumb drive. I'm not going to get into the details of it because by the time you're going to want to do that, you're probably going to forget what I just said here today. So I'm going to avoid going into detail with that one. The bottom row here, preferences. Preferences are just the simple settings like, is the screen bright enough for you? You can change that there. Alerts, the volume of the alerts, you can change that there as well. Now, this button here at the bottom middle, setup, this one's a little bit special because this one is only accessible by the admin user. And that makes sense, right? Because you don't want anyone to just come in and change all the settings. And the admin user has to be logged in as admin. They can add additional users that are not admin. So you can add additional end users. And then also change the auto logout feature, especially if you're going to have multiple end users. You may want to change the auto logout functionality to automatically log you out after a certain period of inactivity. You can also change the auto print feature if you have a printer connected to it and add connectivity. And then finally, of course, we have the logout button to log out that currently logged in user. Okay, so here is the box of kits. This is what it looks like. I like to akin this or compare this to the size of 2 large shoe boxes stacked on top of each other. But there are 24 test kits total, meaning that you can run 24 tests total out of each box. But I don't want you guys to get confused because there is a little partition down the middle that separates package 1 and package 2. In package 1, it contains what's called the test space, and this is this orange test space down here pictured below. Package 2 contains 2 components, and that contains this blue sample receiver and this white transfer cartridge. But you need all 3 components to run one test. Also included in these boxes are, of course, your patient collection swabs, a positive QC swab, and a sterile swab for negative QC. Don't get confused by the word sterile swab for negative QC. It's actually just one of the patient collection swabs. You're not going to do anything with it. It's just going to be dry, and you're going to use that as your negative QC. Also, in addition to that, we've got a lot of reading materials like the product insert, quick reference guide, as well as a patient fact sheet, or rather a booklet of them that you can just divvy out to your patients if they want to know more about the virus itself and also what the testing entails. On top of it, there's also not a patient fact sheet, but a healthcare provider fact sheet for your clinicians. So storage and stability. These kits can be stored at room temperature, and I always recommend room temperature as long as it does not exceed 30 degrees Celsius. So that's, roughly not roughly, but it's about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. If you believe that it's going to exceed that temperature, then you should store it at refrigeration. But the caveat to that is, of course, you actually have to bring those components to room temperature before you use it. It is, of course, stable until the expiration date marked on the outer packaging. So here are the three testing components that I mentioned earlier. Package 1 contains this orange test base down below. Package 2 contains these two pieces up top. So the first piece that I'm going to introduce to you is the blue sample receiver. And inside of the sample receiver is a liquid, and that liquid contains buffers and detergents. And the functionality or function of this sample receiver is to remove the sample from the swab. So you're going to stick your swab into that big well filled with liquid. You're going to mix it around, and it's going to sit inside of this little warmer here. And that warmer is going to allow some time and a warm temperature to allow some of those detergents to get to the virus, break open that viral envelope, releasing the genetic material that we're looking for. The second component here is the white transfer cartridge. Basically what it does is it moves sample to test space. So it moves a little bit of the liquid in the sample from the blue sample receiver to the orange test space where the reaction actually occurs. So basically, if you've ever been in a laboratory before, this white transfer cartridge is essentially a pipette. Sucks up some sample here and then dispenses it to this orange test space. Okay, so we do allow 3 different sample types, the nasal swab, throat swab, and an NP swab. However, I think we're going to just stick to the nasal swab for today. So the nasal swab, these are what's provided in the kits. And in fact, it's actually the same exact swab that you would use for a throat collection. But be aware, don't get creative here and use these swabs for an NP collection, because if you kind of take a peek at this, if you can see a little bit of the detail, the nasal swab is much more thicker and rigid than the NP swab. So although it can go back into the nasal pharynx, I do not recommend it unless you really hate your patient. I guess you could, but not recommended. So if immediate testing is not possible, it's highly recommended to place the swab in a clean, unused tube labeled with the patient information. However, it is acceptable to return it to the original package. Just be careful when you're sticking it into the package and taking it out after collection, because of course you don't want to leave too much of the sample inside of that sleeve. The actual stability time of the sample itself after collection is 1 hour. Previously, we used to actually have an extended period, but recently we've actually changed that to 1 hour at room temperature. So that's something relatively new. So if you're doing this at the patient, not bedside, but next to the patient, or in the same facility, this is not usually a problem. Okay, so the actual sample collection for specifically the nasal swab is, first of all, you're going to actually insert the swab into both nostrils, but the first nostril you're going to insert it into is the nostril exhibiting the most drainage or congestion. Using a gentle rotation, you insert the swab until resistance is met, which is at the level of the nasal turbinates. And this is roughly less than an inch into the nostril. You're going to rotate the swab against the nasal wall several times, and then gently remove the swab, and then repeat on the other side. I'm going to skip over the NP and the throat collection. We do have some printouts that I can provide to you if you feel that it's necessary to have these collection tech tips printed out and posted on a wall somewhere. If you do require that, please let me know either by, adding your email into the chat function, and I'll try to get that out to you guys. Okay, running a patient and QC test. So first of all, if you're not already logged into the instrument, you should log in. And then to perform a test or quality control, you're going to either touch Run Test or Run QC Test. Now, don't get those two confused. Do not run a quality control test under Run Test mode or run a patient test under QC mode. You're not going to get valid results, and you're just going to be wasting your time, and you're going to have to repeat everything. After that, you're going to select the test that you want to run, which will be, of course, COVID-19. And then you're either going to enter and confirm the patient ID or a QC sample ID, which is not necessary, but I'm going to kind of show you what I mean by that it's not necessary later. So after entering your patient ID, you're going to confirm it by pressing OK. Just make sure that that patient ID is correct. I know this slide's a lot to take in. I'm going to go through the slide pretty quickly, and then I'm going to switch over back to my video and show you exactly how to start this test. So after confirming your patient ID or confirming the QC, it's going to tell you open the lid, insert test space into device. Now notice that the words test space are in orange, so that means you're going to grab that orange piece and insert it into the orange holder. After that, it'll ask you, is this the test you want to run, COVID-19? And you're going to press OK. Next, it'll say place sample receiver in holder. And again, there's kind of a color coding situation here, right? Sample receiver is in blue, so you're going to grab that blue piece and put it into that blue holder. Now, this is kind of the pain point here. There's a 3-minute warm-up period for all of our viral assays. This is just to warm up that sample receiver, the liquid. Remember, there's liquid in there. We need it at a particular temperature. So you're just going to leave it alone. Now, what I usually suggest is if this works for your workflow, I would rather you guys actually, if you know you have a patient that you need to run a COVID-19 test on, go ahead and get this started. And then while it's warming up, go back to your patient and collect the swab so that you're not just standing in front of your instrument, twiddling your thumbs, waiting for those 3 minutes to be over. If also, this is kind of like a side note, if you're going to step away to answer phones or do something else, because of course, everyone's busy, sometimes we like to multitask, but I don't want you guys to forget that this is warming up for 3 minutes and I don't want it to time out later. So what I suggest is if you're going to step further away from the instrument, set a timer for 3 minutes so that you remember to come back. Because after the warm-up period is over, you have 7 minutes to mix your swab. That's a long time, but if you totally get sidetracked, you may forget about this. So the next step is to remove the seal because there is a little, what I like to call the ketchup bottle seal on that sample receiver. And you're going to mix the swab for 10 seconds, and then you're going to discard the swab. And those 10 seconds, I like people to utilize this little countdown timer. It starts counting down from 7 minutes, and you can use that countdown timer to count your 10 seconds. That kind of standardizes everyone's 10 seconds because, for example, me, I probably count 10 seconds much faster than the next person. After that, you're going to press OK to let it know to move on to the next step. Step 5. This is where you will press the transfer cartridge, that white piece, into receiver, that blue piece. It says click, and you will hear a click, but later on I'm going to show you or insist that you don't rely on the various sounds that you'll hear during this step 5. Next, you're going to move that white transfer cartridge up to the test space, this orange test space, and you're going to push it down until you see an orange indicator descend. So that doesn't mean much to you guys because you can't really quite see what that orange indicator looks like. Here's a little cartoon picture of what that orange indicator looks like, but I would rather switch over to video and show you what it looks like because it's quite a big, it's a big deal to make sure that this step 5 is done properly. Next step is to just close the lid to start the test. So I'm going to stop this PowerPoint for a moment and pause here. I'm going to switch over to video. And I'm going to allow for any questions. I believe, oh, no questions in the chat function. That's fine, but I do see an email, so I will be sure to send you some of those printouts.
I'm writing down the emails as well, and so just in case.
Oh, wonderful.
You know, I'll send you a list because I would definitely like that as well. But yeah, so again, everyone, if you would like the original, like the different types of nasal swab tech tips, like please put your email in the chat. I will copy it and I'll forward it to Kelly. Thank you. Are you able to see the chat now, Kelly?
Yeah, I can see it, but I'm just trying to figure out. I'm assuming you guys can see my video, however, it looks like it's mirrored. Is that correct?
It looks, yeah, I can see it. Although I guess I can't quite tell if it's mirrored. It looks okay.
Okay, because it should say ID now right below.
Okay, yes, it does.
Okay, interesting. It's backwards on my side. Okay, so let me just make sure. Oh, wow, there's a lot of emails coming in. All right.
No worries. I'll copy and paste for you. That way you can focus.
Thank you. I
No
really
worries.
appreciate that. Okay, so, oh, shucks. I've got like 3 different cameras going on here. So.
Oh my God, no worries. I have the same thing when I do the BD stuff, and so yeah, it always ends up being a little bit particular.
Okay. Now I need to figure out how to view. Nope. Well, it looks like there's a bunch of emails coming in anyway, so I feel like this is a good pausing area or point. But goodness, how do I? Okay, hopefully you guys can see my video full screen. I don't know how to pin my video. I can pin somebody else, but not myself. Strange. But okay, so I'll go ahead and get started.
Oh wait, I pinned you.
Oh, wonderful, thank you.
Yeah. You know why? I think because I'm hosting. Yeah. Sorry. I thought I switched it, but but it looks like it's pinned now.
That is a-okay. Wonderful. Okay, so. All right. Now, here is kind of a zoomed up point of view of my instrument. So right now it's asleep. I'm just going to wake up the screen. Here it says enter your user ID or scan. There is a scanner that you can hook up, but I believe you guys aren't going to be utilizing that, so I'm just going to use the keypad, and I'm going to log in as admin, just because I want to show you some of the functions that the admin has access to later on. Okay, so what I'm actually going to demonstrate to you guys is how to run a QC test, because that's the first thing you guys are going to have to do. Because, right, all untrained operators need to run at least one positive or one negative QC. So I'm going to hit Run QC Test. I'm going to go ahead and hit COVID-19. Today I'm actually going to run a negative QC test. So here you can see it says confirm test, COVID-19 test, negative QC test, and that's all correct. Down below it says QC sample ID, it says NA. It's not necessary to put one in. If your facility or if your SOP dictates that you should put something in, you can by entering something in under Edit QC Sample ID. But me, today, I'm not going to put anything in there. A common question that gets asked is, well, if we do put in a QC Sample ID, what could we put in? And sometimes I recommend maybe the lot number of the QC swab itself, which is in a little foil packet. But I'm just going to go ahead, move on, press OK. So now you see the video turns on and it says open lid, and it even shows you how to open the lid. And now I'm going to, of course, open the lid. And it says insert test space into device. So remember, we need package 1 and package 2. I'm going to go ahead and open up package 1. Usually it's helpful to find a notch on one end and just opening it up that way. Here's my orange test space. Here are 2 conical tubes down below. This is where the reaction occurs, and that's actually where the reagents are. And you'll notice that, there's a lot of powder down there, and this is freeze-dried reagent. And that's kind of an important note to remember for later. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind for now. And then on the back side, there's a QR barcode. And that QR barcode gets actually read by this camera back here. So, oops, I'm going to stick the orange test space into device. I'm going to move in a little bit closer. While that kind of registers, I'm going to open up my package 2. And so you'll see that there's those 2 pieces, the sample receiver, as you can see here, and the liquid is down below in this region, and you'll see a seal. You're going to leave that little ketchup bottle seal there until the instrument tells you to remove it. The third piece is, of course, our white transfer cartridge. But for now, I'm going to confirm the test. That is correct, COVID-19 test. That's what I want to run. I'm going to press OK. And now it's telling you place the sample receiver in holder. So I'm going to stick that guy in there. And it's going to warm up for 3 minutes. While that warms up, I'm going to show you a couple of things. Right now, the kits, they contain, those patient swabs. They may look a little bit different than what I have in front of you in this video here, but it's generally the same swab, same type of swab, and this is how it'll look. I am going to use this as my negative QC since it's a blank swab. Just going to leave it in there. And of course, you're going to use this swab for your patients as well. Now, a little technique that I want you guys to kind of be aware of is if you're going to take this out collect it from a patient. We're not doing QC, or we're not talking about QCs now. If you're going to use this to collect a patient swab, you collect the swab, go into their nasal cavity, and if you're going to stick it back into the sleeve or the original packaging, and you're not going to, use this swab and test it right away, try to make a nice little opening for the sleeve itself, and just kind of carefully stick it into this original packaging. You don't have to stick it all the way down below, maybe halfway, as long as, half of the swab is covered. And when you remove it, remove it carefully, making sure that it doesn't slide too much against the sleeve, because, you're just going to leave all that good nasal drainage in the sleeve, and there's not going to be much to test on the swab itself. One more thing is this final piece here. So here's that transfer cartridge. Remember that time I mentioned an orange indicator? If you look down below, all the way at the bottom of this hole at the top of this transfer cartridge, you'll see something orange. It's like an orange plastic piece, and that's the orange indicator. This indicator is crucial in making sure that you're running this test properly. And if you don't pay attention to this, you will possibly get a failed QC or an invalid result, and you will waste your time. You have wasted a kit, and just don't do that. So I'm going to kind of cover the reasons why this indicator is so important in a minute, because the warm-up period is almost done. So you heard that little chime or that ding, and that tells me the warm-up period is over. Now it's telling me remove the seal, mix the swab for 10 seconds, and discard the swab. So notice that timer again. So what I'm going to show you next is how to remove the seal. And, it just looks like a ketchup bottle seal, but there's kind of a method or a particular way of removing it. I know some of you may be like, you know what, I eat a lot of ketchup. I know how to do this. But the seal can be kind of a little finicky. So what I tell people to do is make a peace sign, slap that peace sign to hold down that blue sample receiver. And then what you're going to do is take your little pinchers and grab one of the pull tabs, and you're just going to pull it down towards you. Sounds simple, but sometimes people struggle with it. Anyway, now I'm going to mix my swab. So this is my negative swab, right? It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just clean and sterile. And I'm going to, with a firm hand, I'm going to mix it around in my buffer liquid for 10 seconds. And I'm going to, well, I didn't pay attention to that timer, but I believe that was 10 seconds. Whoopsie daisy. And now I'm going to press OK. If I don't press OK, the countdown timer is just going to continue counting down, and you're just going to kind of wait in front of it, wondering, why isn't it moving along? Because you have to press OK. Okay, so now it says press transfer cartridge into receiver. And again, that word click is there, but please do not rely on the click sounds. What you're going to rely on is that orange indicator. What you're going to see is that orange indicator lift up. And I like to imagine as if that indicator is the sample itself. So when it's getting sucked up into this transfer cartridge, that indicator lifts up. So let's kind of see what happens there. So you're going to push down. I always use 2 thumbs to push down on these things. You guys probably heard a click. That's fine, but you see that orange indicator that has lifted up. Now what I'm going to do is kind of mosey my camera to show you a better view. Okay, so that means that there's sample inside of this cartridge. the most important part, whoops, let's get you closer. Okay, the most important part of this is this portion. You're going to push down pretty hard, and you're going to watch that indicator drop. And if that indicator drop, it's as if you're dropping sample into this test space. So you're going to push down, and it's going to feel like you could possibly break the instrument by pushing down so hard, but you won't. But you saw that indicator drop, right? And the instrument tells you to close the lid to start the test. But something to really be aware of is the fact that the instrument doesn't know if that indicator has dropped or not. That's all on you to make sure that you did properly. All the instrument knows is that that white transfer cartridge has been inserted, but it doesn't know if it's been inserted properly. So that's something to be aware of. Now, I want to show you what happens in that step 5 portion by kind of showing you what happens with these cartridges outside of the instrument. So let's imagine we have an instrument right here. You know, here's the usual setup. We've got the test space, there's freeze-dried reagents down below. We've got our blue sample receiver. You know, after a warm-up, we remove the seal, mix the swab. You know, people usually do that portion correctly. And step 5 is when we move whatever's in here into here. This first part, everyone seems to do this correctly, which is great because some people just kind of rely on the clicks, which again, I said, don't do that. But let's see. Okay, so you see that indicator lift up. Though people do that portion correctly, this is the part that people seem to make errors in. And I'll show you why. So let's pretend that I'm just going to listen for clicks and think that everything's hunky-dory. The instrument's telling me close the lid to start the test, and I do that. So listening for clicks, but not seeing that indicator drop. I'm not sure if you heard it, but there were a couple of cracks there, and it kind of sounds like cracking knuckles, but you see that indicator still up, right? Look down below, you know, there's still dry reagent. Let's push down a little bit further. There we go. There was one more click. If you didn't hear that click, just believe me, there was a click and there's still powder at the bottom. So many people think that, oh yeah, it's ready to go. The instrument's telling me to close the lid, or I'm going to start the test. But if it looks like this, indicator's still up, you're going to get an invalid result or a failed QC. So let's push this down all the way and see what happens. Let's do it correctly now. Okay, so that indicator dropped, and now it's a little bit foamy, but if you take a look, there should be liquid down below. So that tells me, you know, sample has been introduced. So that indicator is so important, but of course, when the instrument is actually running or while you're performing a test, I don't want you guys to pull it out and be like, oh yeah, there's liquid down there and I did this correctly. Don't do that, just rely on this little hole here for that indicator. Okay, so while the negative QC is continuing on, I'm going to switch back over to my PowerPoint. Okay. So moving on, before I get into the result interpretation, I do want to cover the assay disposal. So this is basically, how do you toss or dispose of these components? Well, first of all, properly disposing of these test components is very important to minimize the risk of amplicon release. I'll cover what amplicons are later, but essentially you're putting all three pieces together. You're going to lift the white and orange piece, and you're just going to stick it into the blue sample receiver. And they're going to snap in place all together, and you're just going to dispose of it. Now, I'll show you how to do that later when I switch back to my video. Now, result interpretation, as you might have heard, this assay will provide a result in as little as 5 minutes for a positive patient result, or 13 minutes for a negative result. So that includes that warm-up period, that 3-minute warm-up period, which is nice. QC results, you're going to either see them show up as pass or fail, hopefully more passes than fail. And then the patient test results, this is how it'll look. Pretty straightforward, right? You see a plus sign, positives, negative spelled out. So earlier I mentioned invalid test results. So whenever you run a patient and you see invalid, that's never good news, right? First things first is, of course, to try and repeat the test. And I'll show you how to do that in a particular way later. But there are 3 main causes for an invalid test result. The number one reason is actually what we call sample dispense error. So that means when you transfer the sample, you have to make sure that that orange indicator both fully rise and fully descend to assure a complete sample dispense before closing the instrument lid. So essentially what this means is that you didn't introduce sample to the reagent. So of course you're not going to get a valid result. That's why I was really stressing that whole step there, because it's actually more common than you would think. So this is actually really user error related. And so is this one, procedural errors. So this means that if you're in a huge rush, for example, the step here, warming up, step number 3, if you're in a rush and if you're disregarding all the instrument prompts and timings, say for example, you open that seal, you start mixing the swab already, and then you wait for the warm-up period to be over. That's not good, right? So that can result in invalids or maybe even a false negative. Interfering substances. So interfering substances, one of the most common ones that we've seen or witnessed has been excess mucus. So you may be thinking, well, we're going to be swabbing sick patients. They're going to have mucus. How do I avoid excess mucus? My recommendation is actually just asking the patient, hey, can you blow your nose real quick or clear your throat? So for that time being while you're collecting the swab, it's relatively clear of too much mucus. Now, the reason why we believe mucus is an interfering substance is the fact that, it makes it very difficult for the detergents to really break everything down in the sample receiver. So to make sure that you avoid that, of course, adequate and accurate specimen collection is key. And in the lab, we call this, or we say, junk in, junk out, meaning if you've got a junk sample, you're going to get junk results. Now, if you repeat an invalid and you still get an invalid result, we would ask you to contact technical support at this number. However, I do want to mention that on most of our literature, any reading material, on the last few pages, we have the technical support line printed there. So don't feel like you need to write it down or even memorize it. Hopefully you would not ever need to use that number. Okay, so if an invalid result is received, you can repeat the test by using the same blue sample receiver. So what does that mean? That means you don't have to go back to your patient and recollect your swab. use the same blue sample receiver that you mix that swab into. And there's a whole procedure for it. I'm not going to read this out to you. I'm actually just going to show it to you. And you may be wondering, well, before I get into that, the reason why we ask you to do it this way by repeating it with the same blue sample receiver is because if it's due to interfering substances, or even if it's user error related, the chances of having an invalid result the second time around is greatly reduced. And you may be wondering, well, if the patient's swab, let's say it was interfering substances, if it gave me an invalid the first time around, wouldn't it just give me, oops, sorry, that was a really loud chime, but my test is done. But if you got an invalid result the first time around, wouldn't you get an invalid the second time around because it's the same exact swab? Not necessarily, because what we have found is that the longer the sample, the patient sample has been kind of sitting in this blue sample receiver, the longer chance that the elution buffer or the liquid in there has had a chance to really break open that viral envelope, get through whatever interfering substances may be present. And on top of it, it's been sitting in that warmer for a longer period of time. Okay, molecular considerations. Actually, you know what? I want to switch back to my video real quick. Okay, so if you'll take a look at my video, maybe I'll get a little closer there. Okay, so you'll see that it says COVID-19 negative QC pass, so that's great news. If you have a printer hooked up, you can print it out, or if it's on auto print, it'll automatically print out. So first things first, I want to show you how to dispose of the components. So we're going to open this guy up. You're going to lift these two pieces, and I always ask people to kind of get into the habit of taking a look at that indicator, making sure that it's dropped. And what you're going to do is you're just going to push it down onto that blue sample receiver, and sometimes you have to rock it back and forward once to allow it to really snap in together. And I always recommend people put it into their hand and deglove over the components. This kind of really safeguards it and makes sure that nothing breaks open or anything like that. And then you can dispose of this. Now it says close lid to proceed with a self-test, which takes, a few seconds. And I like degloving onto my cartridges because that forces me to change gloves. So that's always a good thing, right? Now, let's say, for example, I have an invalid result. Okay. So let's pretend that the screen, it says invalid, and you're like, oh, great. You open this up, first of all, check and make sure that you at least saw that indicator drop and that there's liquid at the bottom. If there is, then you at least know it may have not been caused by user error. Maybe there was something interfering in the sample itself. So instead of tossing everything, I would ask that you actually put this aside. We'll dispose of it later. We're going to take the blue sample receiver out. And when you take the blue sample receiver out, let me just pull back here. You can actually set it on its side. It won't spill unless you actually knock it over. So just be very careful. Just let it sit there. The liquid will not spill. And then let's say that we're going to rerun a test. Let's say that that invalid was a patient test. And I'm going to go into run test because I'm going to repeat. Going to go and hit COVID-19. here is where I would enter or scan the patient ID. Let's just put something in there. And that's my patient. I'm going to say, yep, that's correct. So now it says open the lid. Insert test space into device. Now, we're going to start a whole new test over. So that means we need fresh new reagents. What does that mean? We're going to have to open up another set of testing components, 1 and 2. We're going to open this up, stick that into the proper compartment, open up package number 2, and now it says confirm the test. I see a question pop up in the chat. I'll just answer that in just a moment. Now it says place sample receiver in holder. So actually, instead of this brand new sample, I'm actually going to insert the one I used previously. And of course, it's going to do the 3-minute warm-up period. And as you can see, you know, there's no seal there. When it moves on to the next step, it's going to say remove the seal. You already did that. It'll say mix the swab, but you already did that. So you just press OK and move on to, you know, do the next step where you push this down. That's after the warm-up period is over, of course, but I'm just kind of not waiting for that warm-up period to finish, but just to show you. And then you would start the test. So I'm just going to cancel this test because that's all I wanted to show you. But there's something important to note here. This guy. We have to throw him away, but we can't throw it away looking like this. We're actually going to make sure that these conical tubes are protected by covering it or encasing it in the blue sample receiver that has never been used. So this blue sample receiver serves 2 purposes, you know, to receive the sample and then also protect these conical tubes. So again, never throw it away looking like this. Always connect it to a sample receiver. And then, of course, deglove. Okay, I'm going to switch over back to my PowerPoint, but while I do that, I'll answer, oh goodness. I'll answer Captain Young's question. So the question was asked, is this test a state-approved trusted testing partner for travel purposes? Actually, you know what? I think that might be a Dr. Desmond question if he's still on the line. I don't believe so, right?
Trusted testing partners, those are laboratories, not instrument, and they have to have several characteristics. It has to be a laboratory with a CLIA certificate of some kind. This method, Abbott ID Now, is a nucleic acid amplification method that meets our requirements for trusted testing partners. But the people doing the testing also have to have some kind of certificate from CLIA, either a certificate of waiver or a regular laboratory CLIA certificate. And then the other thing that's required for to be a trusted testing partner is that the collection of the specimen has to be observed or performed by a medical professional. So this method, ID Now, meets the specs, the requirements for trusted testing partners, but only part of the requirements. I hope that answers the question.
That was great. Thank you so much, Dr. Desmond. I'm really glad you're on the line.
Okay, I'm saving these questions and writing the answers, and so I will again forward this to everyone just in case anyone missed it. So everyone will have access to questions that have been answered or asked in the chat.
Spectacular. Okay. Okay, so moving back onto the PowerPoint, we're almost done here, at least with the ID now. So as Dr. Desmond mentioned, this is a molecular instrument. It's an NAAT, nucleic acid amplification test. So what that means is basically it amplifies, or rather makes copies of a specific genetic sequence that's very specific for the virus that causes COVID-19, and it makes enough copies up till the instrument can detect those copies. Now, those copies are called amplicons. As you can see in this first bullet point here, amplicons are amplified copies of the target, in this case, RNA. It's present in the orange test space reaction tubes after the testing process is complete. If the orange test space is damaged or compromised, these amplicons in these little conical tubes can get released, which contaminates the workspace and testing environment. That sounds scary, but the good news is that amplicons can't make you sick. They're just genetic material. But the problem is that it may cause false positive results. So of course, we do not want any contamination of amplicons. However, the risk for amplicon release is very low if test components are handled and discarded appropriately. So how do we avoid this from happening? First of all, when you're opening and handling package number 1, the orange test space, you have to use the utmost caution. If it falls from even countertop height, unfortunately, you're just going to have to chuck it and start with a new one. I know that sounds wasteful, but we would rather err on the side of caution and not risk an amplicon release. Discard and do not use any components that are dropped, cracked, or found to be damaged. So that means if you open it, you didn't drop it, but you see that there's some sort of weird damage to it. It doesn't look normal. Do not use it. And contact technical support just to let them know that you received potentially faulty kits. Test components must never be discarded individually. That kind of goes back to when I showed you the video of me, making sure that you completely snap all 3 pieces together, and further making sure that amplicons don't get released. I do recommend degloving and covering these components with your gloves. And once those components are assembled, all 3 of them, don't try to break them open. Don't be like, for example, I know this has happened before where, they combine all 3 components, they're getting ready to discard it, but then they realize, oh my gosh, it was an invalid result. So they try to break open or pry off that blue piece to use it for their second run. So do not do that. I would rather you guys not run the risk of contamination. And then finally, clean the instrument daily. So this is once a day. That's what we recommend. Many people do it, more than that, which is fine by us. We don't ever discourage you from being too clean, right? So the instrument itself is maintenance-free and it has no serviceable parts. However, your responsibility is to clean the instrument once a day. There are 3 acceptable cleaning agents, which is one of the following, any of these, 70% ethanol or isopropanol, or 10% bleach. So you just dampen a lint-free cloth, or if you've already got the commercial wipes, you just wipe down the exterior surfaces and lift up the lid, just wipe down everything that's visible. Some things to note is that there are some nooks and crannies that you could potentially get cleaning agents into, but I would recommend against that because there are some sensitive sensors down there, sensitive sensors, and we don't want excess moisture to come into contact with them. And then on top of it, it doesn't say so on this slide, but if you've already got a dampened lint-free cloth with some sort of cleaning agent, you might as well wipe down your workspace as well. Here are those useful documents that I sent to the original invitees to this meeting. One of the most popular documents out of all of these is the CLSI, which is a Word document. So if you ever need to create an SOP, this is great to just kind of copy and paste out of a bit. And then also there's a bunch of logs within this document, like cleaning logs, patient result logs, QC logs that you can utilize if you want to keep a paper trail of your results, or keep track of who's been cleaning and if cleaning has been done daily of every day of patient testing. So for example, if you don't do any patient testing, or if your clinic is closed on a Sunday, I don't expect you guys to come in on a Sunday just to clean this instrument, of course. And on top of it, inside the CLSI, there are training certificates, training checklists, quizzes, very valuable documents within this single Word document. It is about 40 pages long, though, so you're just going to have to peruse through it. For those that have sent me an email or asked me to email them, I'll go ahead and also include this document. Now, if you forget anything I said here today, or if you've got any trainees to train, we've got a wonderful online training modules that you can view. And I will also send you a link to that as well. And we recommend that you guys look at these rather than go to YouTube, because sometimes many of those YouTube videos are not sanctioned by Abbott. So please try to utilize that link that I will be sending you. There are 8 different modules. The videos are very well done. In fact, much better than what I just showed you earlier. And so that's great, especially if you got a trainee and you don't have time to train them. Okay, we've got some disclaimers to read out. So the ID NOW COVID-19 is being utilized under an emergency use authorization, abbreviated as EUA. So therefore, it has not been FDA cleared or approved. It has, however, been authorized by the FDA under the EUA for use by authorized laboratories and patient care settings. The test has been authorized only for the detection of nucleic acid from SARS-CoV-2, not for any other viruses or pathogens. That kind of common sense, right? And is only authorized for the duration of the declaration that circumstances exist justifying the authorization of the emergency use of in vitro diagnostic tests for the detection and or diagnosis of COVID-19 under this section here. I'm not going to read that, unless the authorization is terminated or revoked sooner. All right, so that was a lot. So that was the end. I'm going to stop presenting. If there's any questions, I'm going to take a peek at the chat function.